The 3:13 a.m. call. Night was at its height in a small and quiet town in the northern U.S. state of Oregon. The cold wind was making whistle-like sounds through the trees. The streets were empty, and the entire city seemed as quiet as a cemetery. Ethan Walker was sitting alone in his apartment. He was a YouTube creator who made horror and creepypasta stories. That night, he was editing his new video. A terrifying image was on his computer screen when suddenly his mobile phone rang. The time on the clock was 3:13 a.m. Ethan picked up the phone. There was no number on the screen. Only one word was written. Unknown. Who could it be? He thought to himself. The calls kept coming. Finally, he picked up the call. Hello. There was silence for a few seconds. Then a weak girl's voice was heard. Please help me. Ethan sat up straight. Who are you? The girl started crying. She's in my room. Suddenly, a terrifying scream was heard, and the call was disconnected. The room was completely silent. Ethan's hands were cold. He immediately checked the call log, but there were no calls there, as if no one had just called. A few minutes later, the computer screen flickered shut down. The entire apartment was plunged into darkness. The only sound was the sound of the rain falling outside. Then, he heard someone walking slowly behind him. Tick, tick, tick. Ethan's heart started beating fast. He immediately turned around. But the room was empty. There was no one. At that moment, the mobile rang again. This time there was no unknown caller. There was only a number written on the screen. 666-1313. Ethan's body shivered. He picked up the call. There was only the sound of breathing on the other end. Then a male voice was heard. A voice that didn't sound like a human being. You answered. Ethan's throat went dry. Who are you? There was silence for a few seconds. Then the answer came. It's too late now. The call ended. Suddenly, all the windows in the apartment started shaking at once, as if a severe earthquake had struck outside. Ethan went closer to the window, and what he saw, his breath stopped. Right outside the window on the 7th floor, a black being stood in the air. Its long legs were unusually large. The face was completely hidden in darkness, but his two white eyes were clearly visible. He was looking straight at Ethan. Suddenly, he smiled. A smile that was impossible on a human face. Ethan screamed and backed away. When he looked at the window again, the thing had disappeared. It was 10 a.m. Ethan's sleep was awakened by a mobile notification. There was a new message on the screen. The message only had one picture. His hands started shaking as he looked at the picture. It was a picture of his bedroom. The picture had been taken at night, and in the picture, Ethan himself was sleeping, but a tall black figure stood by his bed, exactly what he had seen outside the window. Under the picture was only one sentence. Tonight, I come closer. Tonight, I'll come closer. Ethan's blood froze. Because no one else had taken this picture. This picture had been sent from his own cell phone. And the picture wasn't even on his phone. At that moment, there was a loud knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Ethan opened the door. There was no one outside. There was only an old black envelope. A name was written in red ink on the top of the envelope. Ethan Walker. And below, it was a date. October 31st, 2026. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a torn-out newspaper page. The headline was, Local YouTuber Ethan Walker found dead in his apartment. And the picture attached, Ethan's own. The newspaper that published future deaths. Ethan's hands were shaking badly. He kept looking at the newspaper clipping. It clearly had his picture on it. Below it was written, Local YouTuber Ethan Walker was found dead in his apartment. The cause of death is still unknown, according to police. And the scariest thing, the news was dated just 3 weeks later. That means the news would have been published in the future. This is impossible, Ethan told himself. But somewhere in his heart, he knew that what was happening was not normal. That same evening, he called his old friend Jake Morrison. Jake had been his best friend since university, and now he was working as a cybersecurity expert. Jake, I need your help. An hour later, Jake was at Ethan's apartment. He saw the newspaper clipping, the details of the calls, and the photo of the dark entity standing next to Ethan's bed. Jack was silent for a while. Then he said, "If this is a joke, it's a very dangerous joke." "And if it's not a joke?" Jack didn't answer. That night, the two of them started checking the entire data on the phone together. Several hours passed. Then suddenly Jack stopped. His eyes were fixed on the screen. "Ethan, what happened?" "I found something." He turned the laptop towards Ethan. There was a strange record in the call history. Incoming call. Date: October 31st, 2026. Time: 3:13 a.m. Ethan's face turned white. "This is from 3 weeks ago." Jack nodded slowly. "And the duration of the call is also recorded." "How long?" 4 minutes and 13 seconds. "So..." Jack licked his dry lips. "There's no record of the phone after that." The room fell silent. Ethan knew what that meant. According to the records, his phone had never been used since October 31st. Around midnight, Jack went back. But before he left, he had a piece of advice. "If this is all the work of a human, we'll find him. And if not..." Jack fell silent. 2:47 a.m. Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept staring at the ceiling. It had started to rain. The wind was hitting the windows. Then the phone rang. Unknown caller. Ethan's heart jumped into his throat. He picked up the call. "Who are you?" Silence. Then a whisper was heard. "Don't look down." The call was disconnected. At that moment, he heard the sound of something crawling from under his bed. Snoring, snoring, snoring. Ethan's whole body became numb. The sound was clearly coming from under the bed. He explained to himself, "Maybe it's a rat." But the next moment, a faint laugh was heard from under the bed. Not human laughter, the laugh of something that was trying to become human. Ethan jumped out of bed and stood away. He had a baseball bat in his hand. There was silence in the room. Then slowly, 2 white eyes appeared from under the bed. Ethan's breathing stopped. The thing was in complete darkness. Only the eyes were visible, and those eyes weren't even blinking. Suddenly the lights in the entire room went out. Darkness. Complete darkness. Only lightning flashed outside. When the next lightning flashed, the thing wasn't under the bed. Sweat started pouring down Ethan's body. He turned on his mobile phone's flashlight. The room was empty, but then he slowly raised his head, and the blood froze in his veins. The thing was hanging upside down from the ceiling, just like a spider. Its long black body was glued to the ceiling. The white eyes were staring straight at Ethan, and its face, now more clear than ever. There were hundreds of fine teeth in its mouth. "Ethan," the thing spoke. The voice was exactly like its own. "You're late." Ethan ran towards the door, screaming. But the door wouldn't open. Despite repeated attempts, it wouldn't open. Then he heard someone coming down behind him. Knock, knock, knock. The thing was coming down from the ceiling. Ethan didn't dare turn around, but he knew the thing was now standing right behind him. He felt a cold breath near his ear. Then he heard a whisper. "The third name has been found." Suddenly, everything returned to normal. The lights came on. The door opened. The room was empty, as if nothing had happened. With trembling hands, Ethan picked up the phone. There was a new image on the screen. This time it wasn't just him in the image. It was Jack too. Below the picture was written in red, "Name number 2 collected." And below that, "Next, Jake Morrison." Ethan's heart sank. He realized that this thing wasn't just after him. Now Jake had become part of his game. And maybe there were more names on the list. At that moment, Jack's phone rang. Ethan immediately picked up the call. On the other end, Jack was panting. "Ethan, Jack, what happened?" For a few moments, only noise could be heard. Then Jack said in a frightened voice, "There's someone standing outside my house." "Who?" "He." Jack's voice broke. "He looks just like me." And then suddenly, a terrible scream was heard. The call was disconnected. Jack in the mirror. The phone almost fell from Ethan's hands as the call ended. Jack's screams were still ringing in his ears. He knew that wasting time could mean death. He immediately entered Jack's address into his phone, grabbed his car keys, and stepped out into the rain. It was 3 a.m. The streets were empty. Dark clouds were gathering in the sky, and lightning flashed every few seconds. It seemed as if the whole world was waiting for some impending disaster. About 20 minutes later, Ethan arrived at Jack's house. All the rooms in the house were lit. The main door was open. The wind was slowly shaking the door.
Chi.
He entered cautiously. The whole house was in disarray. The furniture was upside down. There were scratches on the walls, as if something had tried to tear them with its nails. Then he saw something on the floor. Drops of red.
Blood.
Traces of blood were heading towards the stairs. Ethan's heart started beating fast. He turned on his mobile phone's flashlight and slowly started climbing up. With each step, the fear inside him grew. When he reached the top, he stopped in front of Jack's bedroom. The door was half open. There was complete silence inside. Ethan pushed the door open and immediately fell silent. There was a large mirror in the middle of the room, and Jack stood in front of the mirror. Absolutely silent. Absolutely silent. As if in a trance. "Jack!" Ethan shouted. Jack didn't react. He slowly approached him. Then he saw something that shook his soul. The Jack in mirror was not the real Jack. The real Jack stood still, but the Jack in the mirror was smiling. Ethan's breath caught. He looked again carefully. Yes, the Jack in the mirror was moving, while the real Jack wasn't. The Jack in the mirror slowly turned his head and looked at Ethan. He had an unnatural smile on his face, and his eyes were completely black. Then he moved his lips, although there was no sound coming out. But Ethan could clearly read the words. "It's too late." Suddenly Jack shouted loudly, "Ethan, back off." At that moment, the thing inside the mirror pulled its hand out of the glass. The glass began to wave like water, and a long black arm came out. Ethan backed away in fear, but the arm moved towards Jack's neck with extraordinary speed. "No!" Ethan screamed. He picked up a nearby lamp and slammed it with all his strength on the mirror.
Bang!
The glass shattered into pieces. The whole room echoed, and at that moment, the black arm disappeared. Jack fell to the ground, panting, drenched in sweat.
"Jack!"
Ethan ran to him. A few moments later, Jack barely opened his eyes. He was going to take me.
Who?
The fear was clearly visible on Jack's face. The same thing. What thing? Jack answered in a trembling voice. The one people call the caller. This was the first time anyone had mentioned this entity by name. "You know him?" Jack nodded. "I saw an old case 2 years ago." "What case?" "A dozen people died under mysterious circumstances. And the same number was found on everyone's phone. 666-1313? Jack's face turned pale. "Yes." The room fell silent. Then Jack said, "The police found one more thing."
"What?"
"Everybody who died had mirrors in their homes." A thrill ran through Ethan's body. "What are you trying to say?" Jack said softly. "He communicates by phone and comes in through mirrors." At that moment, a small mirror in the corner of the room began to move on its own. They both looked at it in shock. The surface of the mirror was rippling like water. Then a face appeared in it. The same dark eyes. The same inhuman smile. The caller. This time, he was completely visible. His body was long and thin. His arms were unusually long. And his face. It seemed to be something between a human and another creature. He smiled. Then, for the first time, he said in a clear voice, "4 names left." Suddenly, the electricity in the entire house went out. Darkness. Complete darkness. And in that darkness, Ethan realized that he and Jack were no longer the only ones in the room. Someone else was there. Something huge was breathing. And that breathing was coming from right behind them. List of the dead. The room was pitch black. Ethan and Jack stood still. The sound of their breathing was clearer than ever. Heavy, deep, and inhuman. It seemed as if a huge creature was standing right behind them. Jack whispered softly, "Don't move." Ethan's throat was dry. He could feel the thing circling them. but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. Then, suddenly, the power came back on. The room was empty. The thing had disappeared, but there was something new in front of him. An old leather file lay on the floor. The file hadn't been there a few seconds before. Jack hesitantly picked up the file. There was only one word written in red on it.
List.
Jack opened the file, and both of their faces went pale. Inside were dozens of names. Some had red crosses on them, and the rest had blank spaces in front of them. At the end of the list were a few new names: Ethan Walker, Jake Morrison, Emily Carter, Ryan Brooks. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Emily. Jack looked up. You know her? She was a friend of mine from college. And Ryan Brooks? A city detective. Jack fell silent. That means we're all connected. At that moment, an old newspaper clipping fell from inside the file. The date was October 1989. The two were shocked as they read the headline. All employees of Blackwood radio station mysteriously missing. Jack immediately started searching the internet. After a few minutes, he looked up. This case is still unsolved. What happened? One night, all the broadcasters suddenly disappeared. The bodies never found. The room fell silent. Then Jack opened another photo. It was of an old radio station. There were 7 people in the photo. Ethan's gaze suddenly stopped on a face. This is impossible. What happened? Ethan pointed at the photo with a trembling finger. The person in the photo looked exactly like Ethan. Same face, same eyes. Only the clothes were old. The name below the photo was written: Edward Walker, 1989. Ethan's hands began to tremble. Walker. That's my family name. Jack looked at him in surprise. Maybe you have a relative. But Ethan knew it couldn't just be a coincidence. At that moment, a sealed envelope on the last page of the file caught his eye. The envelope read, "For Ethan only." A strange silence fell over the room. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was only one letter. The letter was dated October 30th, 1989. That's about 37 years old. Ethan began to read. If you're reading this letter, it means it's reached you now. My name is Edward Walker, and if you're from the Walker family, you're in danger. We made a mistake that opened a door. We were experimenting on a certain frequency at Blackwood radio station. We thought we were receiving distant signals, but in reality, we were communicating with something else. The first call came at 3:13 a.m., and then people started disappearing. We gave this entity a name. The caller. Ethan's body shivered. The letter further read, "The caller doesn't kill people right away. First he names them, then he takes their picture, then he duplicates them, and finally, takes their place." The letter almost fell from Ethan's hand. Takes their place?
Jack asked, worried.
What does that mean? Ethan was about to answer when suddenly, a new message came on his phone. A picture. Ethan opened the picture, and his soul left his body as if. In the picture, he and Jack were there. They were both sitting in the same room, but behind them in the picture, a third person was standing.
Tall.
Black. Smiling. The caller. But the real scary thing wasn't that. The real scary thing was that the picture had just been taken, and that person was still standing behind them. Ethan and Jack slowly turned around and looked back. The room was empty. There was no one. Then, suddenly, there was movement in the large mirror in front of them. Ethan and Jack were visible in the mirror, but between them, there was also a third reflection. The same black being. He slowly bowed his head, and for the first time, he said his name, Ethan Walker. Then his smile widened. The time has come to take your place. Suddenly, the mirror cracked with a loud bang.
Bang.
And at that moment, the power went out in the entire city. Only a voice echoed in the darkness. Next name, Emily Carter. Emily Carter. The entire city was plunged into darkness. The electricity was gone. The streetlights on the streets were out. It was raining nonstop, and broken mirror shards were scattered on the floor. Ethan. Jack's voice was trembling. He just called Emily's name. Ethan knew what that meant. the name that was announced on the list. That person would sooner or later become a victim of the caller. He immediately called Emily Carter. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. The 4th time the call was received. "Hello." Hearing Emily's voice, both of them breathed a sigh of relief. "Emily, listen to me right now. What happened? You're in danger." There was silence for a few moments. Then, Emily started laughing. "Ethan, jokes at 3 in the morning are not good." "I'm not joking." At that moment, Emily fell silent. "Wait. What happened?" "There's someone in my house." Ethan and Jack looked at each other. Emily's breathing was rapid. "I thought I was alone." Then footsteps sounded on the phone. Knock, knock, knock. Emily spoke slowly in a whisper. "Someone's walking upstairs." "Emily, get out of the house now." But there was only silence in response. Then suddenly, a terrifying scream. And the call ended. Damn. Ethan immediately picked up the car keys. Emily's house was on the other side of town. He and Jack drove out in the rain. The only question that was on Ethan's mind all the way was this: will they make it on time? Or will it be too late? 15 minutes later, they arrived at Emily's house. The main door was open. There was complete silence inside. "Emily." No answer. "Emily." Still silence. Ethan and Jack entered cautiously. The house was in a strange state. All the pictures had fallen from the walls. Several mirrors were broken. And on the remaining mirrors, a single sentence was written in red. "He is here. He is here." Jack's hands began to tremble. It happened before we got there. At that moment, there was the sound of something falling from above.
Bang.
The two immediately ran towards the stairs. Emily's bedroom was upstairs. The door was half open. Ethan pushed the door open. And the scene he saw, he could never forget it for the rest of his life. The room had the same picture on all the walls. The picture of the caller. Hundreds of times. As if some madman had made that same face all night. And in the middle of the room, Emily was sitting. Silent. Motionless. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror in front of her. Emily. She didn't move. Emily. No reaction. Ethan slowly approached her. Then he saw Emily's eyes had turned completely black, as if the pupils had disappeared. Jack immediately backed away. "No." He touched her. At that moment, Emily raised her head, very slowly, unnaturally, and then she smiled. It wasn't Emily's smile. It was exactly like the caller. "You're late." It wasn't Emily's voice. It was someone else's voice.
Deep, cold, and scary.
"Where is he?" Ethan shouted. Emily smiled even more. He's always been here." Suddenly, the entire mirror began to shake. The temperature in the room dropped. Smoke began to rise from his breath. Then the surface of the mirror began to ripple like water. And for the first time, the caller began to come out completely. A long black hand came out of the mirror. Then another. Then his face. Ethan's heart nearly stopped, because his face was no longer the same. It was changing every few seconds. Sometimes Emily. Sometimes Jake. Sometimes Ethan. And sometimes he would take the form of an unknown person, as if he had dozens of faces trapped inside him. "He copies all of them," Jack said in a frightened tone. "The ones he takes." The caller was slowly coming out of the mirror, and his body was getting bigger every moment. 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet. Then he looked at Ethan and smiled. "Walker family, you guys open the door." And now the door is about to open completely. At that moment, the whole house shook with a strong jolt. Cracks began to appear in the walls. The mirrors began to crack one by one.
Bang, bang, bang.
And dozens of black eyes began to stare at them from inside each mirror. Then the caller extended his hand towards Ethan. "Only 3 names left. And then, I will be free." Suddenly, Emily screamed loudly. A scream that didn't seem to come from her own body. And in the next moment, the entire room was plunged into darkness. When the light came back, Emily was gone. The caller was gone too. Only on the floor was a new message written in blood. Next name, Ryan Brooks. And beneath it, a time was written. 3:13 a.m. Tomorrow night, Ethan and Jake were gone.
They had only one day left.
To save Ryan Brooks. And maybe to save themselves too. Blackwood radio station. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. Emily had disappeared. The caller had once again disappeared from their sight. And the message written in blood on the floor was still there before them. Next name, Ryan Brooks. 3:13 a.m. Tomorrow night. Ethan knew that time was running out. If he didn't reach Ryan Brooks in time, he would be on the list too. But before that, he had another mystery to solve. Blackwood radio station. The place where it all began. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Gray clouds covered the sky. Ethan and Jack arrived at the city records office. After hours of searching, they found the original file for the Blackwood radio station. The file was stamped with a thick red seal. Restricted. Jack opened the file. The first few pages were ordinary. Former employee information, technical reports, broadcast records. But the last pages silenced them both. In 1989, engineers at the radio station were conducting a secret experiment. They claimed that signals that did not come from Earth could be received through certain radio frequencies. At first, everything was normal. Then one night, at 3:13 a.m., a signal was received. The signal was in no language, but everyone who heard it said the same thing. Someone was listening to us from the other side. And that was the first call that came that night. 666-1313. The file also mentioned an audio recording. Final broadcast. The final broadcast that the station recorded minutes before it disappeared. We've opened the door. For God's sake, close it. He's watching us. Then a loud scream. And complete silence. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. A door? Jack said softly. Maybe they weren't talking about a real door. Maybe a way between two worlds. At noon, the two set off for Blackwood radio station. The building was located deep in the woods, about 30 miles from the city. The road was broken. The trees were unusually thick. And as they got closer, the cell phone signal was disappearing. Finally, they reached the building. Blackwood radio station. The building looked about 40 years old. The windows were broken. The walls were covered in moss. And the main door was half open, rusted. It seemed as if someone was still waiting for them inside. They entered. The air smelled of rot. There was dust everywhere. But there was something strange. There were fresh footprints on the floor. Someone has been here recently, Jack whispered. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on a large hall in front. The same broadcast room, where the last broadcasts had been. Everything inside the room was almost as if it had been left in 1989. Microphones, control panels, recording machines, and an old clock on the wall, which was still stopped. 3:13 a.m. Jack suddenly opened a cupboard. Inside it were dozens of cassettes. One of the cassettes had a red marker saying, "Do not play." They both looked at each other. A few seconds later, Ethan picked up the cassette. This must be it. They turned on the old player. The cassette started playing. At first, there was just noise. Then a man's panicked voice was heard. "If anyone is listening to this, don't come here. We made a mistake." What we heard wasn't a signal. That was an answer. Suddenly, someone screamed in the background. Then another voice was heard. "He's in the mirrors. Break all the mirrors." The recording began to deteriorate. The noise began to increase. Then a voice was heard that froze both Ethan and Jack. It was the caller's voice. But this time it was much clearer than before. "The door is open, and I'm coming." Suddenly the player turned off automatically. The room fell silent. Then, the red light on the old microphone lit up, even though there was no electricity. A moment later, a voice came from the speaker. "Good evening, Blackwood." Ethan's body shivered. That voice echoed throughout the station. "Tonight we have two special guests, Mr. Ethan Walker and Mr. Jake Morrison." The sound of laughter began to come from the speaker. The same inhuman laughter. Then the microphone turned on automatically, and smoke began to come out of it. The temperature in the room began to drop. Shadows began to move on the walls. Suddenly, a secret door in the back of the broadcast room opened. It was pitch black inside. But on the wall was a sentence written in red. "The original door," Jack said softly. "Maybe this is where it all began." Ethan turned on the flashlight, and the two entered the secret passage. Inside was an underground room, and in the middle of the room, standing a giant ancient mirror, at least 10 feet high, black frame, and the surface was shaking like water. Then suddenly a face appeared inside the mirror. Emily Carter. She was screaming for help. "Ethan, don't come. It's a trap." But before she could say anything more, a long black hand came around her neck, and she was dragged into the darkness. Then the caller appeared from inside the mirror, this time much larger than before, more terrifying than ever. And behind him, there were hundreds of faces, all the people he had taken. Emily, Edward Walker, all the broadcasters of 1989, and countless unknowns. The caller smiled
and said,
"The final stage begins at 3:13 tomorrow night. And Ryan Brooks is just the beginning." Then his white eyes fixed directly on Ethan. "The Walker family debt will now be paid." The mirror surface began to shake, and the entire underground room began to shake, as if something was trying to come out from the other side. The last list. The underground room was shaking. The giant mirror was making sounds like an ocean was trapped inside it. The caller's white eyes were still fixed on Ethan. Behind him, hundreds of faces were screaming, begging for help, and Emily was among them. Then suddenly, everything went silent. The caller smiled softly and said, "Tomorrow night at 3:13 the door will open completely, and then your world will be mine." In the next moment, the mirror turned into black smoke. The room was plunged into darkness, and when the flashlight returned, the thing was gone. But there was something new on the floor. An old notebook. On its cover it read, "Edward Walker." Ethan's heart pounded. It was the notebook of the same person mentioned in the 1989 photo. He quickly turned the pages. The first few pages were filled with general notes, frequency numbers, radio signals, technical calculations. But the last few pages were blood-curdling. Edward had written, "We thought we were listening to signals from space. But in reality, he was listening to our world. The caller is not a ghost, not a demon. He is a being who eats identities." Ethan paused. "He doesn't take a body, he takes a name. When someone joins his list, he steals that person's memories, voice, face, and identity. Eventually, the original person is gone, and only his copy remains." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "That means Emily might still be alive." "Yes. And Ryan too." There was a map on the last page of the notebook, and below the map was a sentence, "The keeper of the list." "Who is this?" Jack asked. Ethan looked at the map. He was pointing to the old cemetery in the city. By evening, the two of them had reached the cemetery. It was the oldest cemetery in the city. Many of the graves were from the 1800s. The air was unusually cold, and there was silence everywhere. The map led them to a secluded part of the cemetery. There was a small stone tomb. On the door was written only one word, "Keeper." As soon as the door was pushed open, the stale air inside came out. Inside was a small room, and in the middle of the room, a very old man sat in a chair. White hair, yellow eyes, and a wrinkled face. It looked like he had been waiting for them for years. "Finally, you're here,"
he said softly.
Ethan and Jack looked at each other. "Who are you?" The old man smiled. "I am the keeper of the list. You know the caller?" "I know him better than you." The room fell silent. Then the old man placed an old book on the table. There were hundreds of names written inside this book, the same names that were on the caller's list. "Every 100 years," the old man said, "the door weakens, and the caller tries to enter our world. How to stop it?" The old man's smile disappeared. "There's a price to pay." "What price?" The old man looked straight at Ethan. "The Walker family." Ethan's heart stopped beating. In 1989, Edward Walker tried to close the door, but he failed. So now there's a blood debt. "What do you mean?" The old man's voice became heavy. "Only a Walker can close the door. And in the process, He never comes back. The room fell into complete silence. Jack immediately stood up. There must be another way. The old man shook his head slowly.
No.
Last night at 3:13, either the door will close, or the world will open up. At that moment, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown caller. Ethan picked up the phone. For the first time, there was not complete silence on the other end. Emily's voice was coming. Ethan, listen to me. Emily, she was crying. Don't stop him. What? You don't know what he really wants. Suddenly, Emily's voice began to change. Deep, cold, inhuman. And then the caller spoke. Now you're getting closer to the truth. I already have Ryan Brooks. Ethan's heart sank. And now there are only 2 names left. The last list. Then the call ended. An image appeared on the phone screen. Ryan Brooks was tied to a chair. Emily was there with him. And behind them both, there was that great mirror. Beneath the picture was written only a time. 3:13 a.m. Tonight. And one sentence. The final broadcast is about to begin. Ethan knew. The hour of decision had come. Either he would save Emily and Ryan, or he would become a part of the caller's world forever. It was 3:02 a.m. Only 11 minutes left. 11 minutes. Before the clock read 3:13 a.m. Before the door opened completely. And before the caller was freed from his prison. Ethan, Jack, and the keeper of the list were hurrying towards the Blackwood radio station. The rain had started again. Thunder was blaring in the sky. And with each flash of lightning, the trees in the forest seemed to cast strange shadows. 3:08 a.m. They arrived at the station. But this time the building was not the same. The entire radio station was shrouded in black smoke. Strange lights were shining inside the windows. And the scariest thing of all, the sounds of old radio broadcasts were coming from inside. Screams, whispers, and countless names. As if hundreds of people were speaking at once. 3:09 a.m. They entered the broadcast room. And stopped immediately. In the middle of the room was the same great mirror. But now it was many times bigger than before. Almost the size of an entire wall. Within it were waves like a black ocean moving. And in front of it, Emily and Ryan were tied up. Both were alive. But the fear in their eyes was clear. Then suddenly the speakers turned on automatically. A red light flashed. And a voice echoed throughout the station. Welcome to the final broadcast. The caller. The surface of the mirror began to shake. And he began to emerge. First his hand. Then his long body. Then his face. But this time, he didn't look like anyone else. This time his face wasn't constantly changing. It was the same face. A human face. The face of an old broadcaster.
Keeper's color drained.
God bless you. You know him? Jack asked. Keeper nodded slowly. This isn't the original caller. This is the founder of Blackwood Station. Jonathan Reed. Chief broadcaster before 1989. Ethan was shocked. What? Keeper took a deep breath. This was his first attempt at contacting the other world. He wanted knowledge. Unlimited information. Unlimited power. But something on the other side changed him. He was no longer human. He became the caller. At that moment, Jonathan Reed smiled. Finally, someone remembered the truth. His voice echoed throughout the station. I wasn't a prisoner. I was waiting. 100 years. For a new world. 3:12 a.m. Only a minute remained. Thousands of faces appeared in the mirror. Emily, Ryan, Edward Walker, all the broadcasters from 1989, and countless others. They were all screaming for help. Ethan, Emily screamed. Close the door. Now. The caller started laughing. You think you can win? The list is complete. Only the last name remains. He looked straight at Ethan. Ethan Walker. The entire room began to shake. The clock showed 3:13 a.m. At that moment, the great mirror opened completely. Black smoke spread everywhere. The door to the other world had opened. The keeper shouted. Now. Ethan opened Edward Walker's notebook. There was writing on the last page. The door will be closed with the blood of the person whose family opened it. Ethan fell silent. Now he understood everything. Edward could not close the door. And now the responsibility was on him. Jack grabbed his arm. No, there must be another way. Ethan shook his head.
No.
It was always my destiny. Then he looked at Ryan and Emily and smiled. Bring them back. The next moment he ran towards the mirror. The caller screamed angrily. No. The entire building began to shake. Ethan cut his hand deeply, and the blood smeared the mirror. Immediately, a white light erupted. The caller's scream echoed throughout the forest. All the faces imprisoned inside the mirror began to break free. Emily, Ryan, Edward, and hundreds of other souls. The caller was trying to stop them, but it was too late now. The light grew brighter, and then everything went silent. A year later, Blackwood radio station no longer existed. Only scorched earth remained in its place. Ryan Brooks survived. Emily too. Jack left town, but Ethan Walker never returned. The police never found his body. Only one thing was found, an old cell phone, lying in the rubble. The phone was completely turned off, but when the forensic team turned it on, there was a new voicemail. Just one. The recording was played. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Ethan's voice was heard. If you're listening to this, then maybe I succeeded. There was silence for a few moments. Then a faint laugh was heard from far away. The same laugh. The caller's. And then one last sentence. The call never ends. The recording ended. To this day, sometimes at 3:13 a.m., some people get an unknown call on their phone. And if they pick up the call, only one question is heard from the other end. Are you listening?